Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Basel Podcast. I'm Sam Basel, and today I'm joined alongside Michael DeRosa. Mike, how you doing this weekend?
Doing well. It was a really good day of hoops, and excited to talk some tournament teams, some teams that are actually good, and then we're going to talk about some teams that stink. So it should be fun.
Yeah, as Mike just alluded to, we're going to be breaking down kind of where a lot of teams stand in terms of the 2025 NCAA men's basketball tournament. Obviously, we're about a little over a month away from Selection Sunday 2025, and for a lot of you fans for various programs around the country, you're checking spreadsheets, you're checking your Ken Palms, your bracketologies, your net rankings. You're looking at who's got two quad wins, who's got two quad one wins, who's got maybe three quad three losses, right? It gets very complicated at this point in the season. But to me, sometimes I just feel like the best way to kind of get an idea of where your team's at is simply whether they're in or they're out. So today what we're breaking down is we've broken down several college basketball teams into various tiers based on how likely it is right now that they're going to make the NCAA tournament, and we'll be moving them up and down based on big results from this past week of college basketball. And yesterday, it's probably going to take up the bulk of any movement in these tiers, just because all across the board there were some pretty insane results. Michael, any big games that kind of stuck out to you on yesterday's big slate?
In terms of tournament, this game, it's definitely going under the radar, but New Mexico New Mexico's put themselves in a spot to where they could be even a single-digit seed in the tournament. That win at Utah State. Utah State is a team I love. I still love that team. They just played a shit game, like they couldn't hit shots. And New Mexico won that game. And that is a road win for New Mexico that's going to pay dividends in March. That could get them looking good in the tournament. That's definitely one that stood out to me in terms of maybe not enough people were talking about how this team could be moving up, but New Mexico, I think, is one. And I'm going to see if I can find another. There's definitely something. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. Wake stays alive by beating Pitt. That keeps them still in the conversation. Oklahoma put B to A to Vandy. That'll definitely keep them going. And then Louisville probably tanks a little bit with a loss to a not great Georgia Tech team.
Yeah, absolutely. Great picks. And we'll get into plenty more. But right now, I want to show you the graphic that we've developed that kind of serves as the basis for this podcast, and that is the 2025 NCAA tournament tiers. So for those of you who are seeing this for the first time, which is pretty much everybody watching, except for DeRosa and I took a compilation of the net ranking, Ken Palm, all the major bracketologists, so that being TSN Mike, Joe Lunardi from ESPN, and as well as the AP poll, coaches poll, and House Enterprise top 25, and basically just created a loose, not super scientific ranking of all the teams. I created an aggregate score, and I've kind of lumped them into various different tiers in terms of how likely it is if the season ends today, they would make the NCAA tournament. Don't focus on where teams are in order in terms of these tiers. Just focus on exactly where in the chart they currently sit. On the far left, you've got the locks, and I put an asterisk here because there is no true lock to the NCAA tournament until your team's name is called on Selection Sunday and they get put into that bracket. However, that being said, it's more likely than not that these teams come Selection Sunday will find themselves in the NCAA tournament. The next tier, fairly comfy. This is the largest tier, and these are teams that, barring like the locks, a catastrophic meltdown towards the, down the stretch in late February, early March, have a pretty good shot at getting, anywhere from, a 6 to 11 seed in the tournament. Next is the bubble. These are teams both on the right side of the bubble and on the wrong side of the bubble that they've put up a good performance so far, but we just need to see a little bit more out of them before we can say that they're definitely an NCAA tournament team. That next tier is the long shots. These are teams that may have had some at-large buzz at one point in the season, or maybe are developing some at-large buzz, but really need to show out and finish very strong to make it as an at-large team. And then that final tier are one bid leagues. There are a lot of teams that look really good, but they're pretty much their only shot at making the tournament is winning their own conference tournament. That is obviously the bulk of the conferences. Based on a lot of projections, it looks like there's going to be 7 to 8 conferences that are multi-bid, and then the rest are going to kind of just fall into, the one bid territory. One thing that you'll notice, I do want to point out, there are some teams that I'm showing to have at-large prospects that are also in the one bid league category. That just means, they have a possibility of being a 2-bid league or more, but only really if that really strong team manages to not win their tournament. And then we have a bid stealer, like a prominent example being Memphis out of the American, VCU out of the A10, etc. So, Michael, looking at this bracket right now, anything that really jumps out to you in terms of a team that should, either that's not on here that should be here, or a team that's in the wrong spot that you see on this bracket?
Yeah, I got a couple. Let's look at the bubble. We're going to look at the bubble section to start. Looking up and down it, there are definitely some teams I see on the bubble that I think, they will be on the bubble. There are 2. Cincinnati, get them out of here. That team fucking stinks. They're horrible. They don't deserve to be anywhere near this tournament. They shouldn't even be in the long shots category. Get them out of here. Out. Gone.
Wow.
They blow. They're terrible. They're not making any tournament. They can't score. They're like 2-8 in Big 12 play, and one of their only Big 12 wins is against the worst team in the conference, Colorado, without 2 Colorado starters. They're not a tournament team. They're not even close. Indiana, I would move to the long shot tier. I just don't think they're very good. They have a chance because the schedule coming up is still tough. They play really tough, but I bump them down a little bit. Those 2, and SMU too, move them to long shots. SMU is really not good either. Those are some pretty poor high majors. Those 3 immediately stuck out to me as like, we sure?
Yeah, so Cincinnati had a pretty Cincinnati, Indiana, and then that third one, what was that again? SMU. Okay, so Big 12, Big 10, ACC. Obviously, 3 strong conferences every single year in the NCAA tournament. Always produce a lot of bids. Big 10, I feel like, has kind of garnered a not so great reputation in the NCAA tournament, being that they always get so many teams in, and then a lot of them don't really make it too far. But I want to start with Cincinnati. So the Bearcats had a pretty strong start to conference play. They had a pretty strong start to the non-con. They dropped just 1 game. They were, they kind of floated around the top 25 throughout at different points in the season, but like you said, it's been night and day in terms of once they started Big 12 play. They've lost their last 3. They're 2-7, and they're playing West Virginia as we speak.
No, they lost. They lost that game too.
They just lost.
Yeah,
that just finished. They lost to West Virginia, so that makes their 4th consecutive loss in Big 12 play. You mentioned that they can't score. What about that shift in scoring have you seen in Big 12 play that's caused them to have such a tough performance in conference play so far?
They don't run any offense. It's so much isolation ball. They don't do anything offensively. There's no movement. It's just one guy trying to create over another. And, I mean, they really cannot score. Like, just looking at KenPom, their offense in conference play is offense efficiency rating is 92.7. The next worst is Oklahoma State at 96. And it's 96, 96-1, 97, Definitive tier gap, 92.7. Worst in effective field goal percentage in the conference, worst in free throw rate in the conference, worst in three-point rate in the conference. They cannot shoot. They cannot get to the line. They can't score in general. The one thing they do well is they don't turn the ball over a ton. But teams don't really have to gamble when you can't score. They're isolating a ton. They're not doing anything to generate offense. They truly might be one of my least favorite teams. That's too far. Let me rephrase. They're one of the worst teams to watch. They're not fun. They're really, really bad to watch. They cannot score for the life of them.
So the reason why I threw them in here is, as I was talking about, I was developing their score They were not in ESPN's bracketology projection. They were not even in the field, even, as far as not even in the bubble in Fox Sports' projection. But they are still within the top 50 in the NCAA net ranking. So I think any team that's kind of floating around the top 40 is at least in some consideration.
I mean, they put belt to ass to some really bad teams. Like they beat Pine Bluff by 50. They beat Nichols by 30. They beat Georgia Tech by 23. They beat Howard by 17. They beat Grambling by 35. And then they play teams with a pulse. And it's like, okay, yeah, they lost to BYU by 28. And they scored 40 points against Kansas at home. 40.
Yeah, that's tough. Like you said, belt to ass, not some great teams. They are 5-2 in quad 2, 7-0 in quad 4. But in quad 1, they have had 6 opportunities against quad 1 teams. They have lost all 6. I know you're very much down on this team, but their upcoming schedule, they're on the road at UCF. Then they have 2 games at home in a row against BYU and Utah before taking on number 3 Iowa State in 2 weeks. Anything in that 4-game stretch that you feel like you could see from the Bearcats to get them back into this conversation, or has the ship just sunk in Cincinnati for you?
Yeah, if they go on the road at Iowa State and win, then they can maybe be back in the conversation.
That's it?
That's it.
All right. So Cincinnati, first big change here. They went from the bubble, and they are off the graphic entirely. The next team that you mentioned, Indiana, again, another bubble team. Yeah. Again, another team struggling in conference play. They've lost 5 of their last 6, including 3 in a row to Northwestern, Maryland, and Purdue. I got to say that Maryland loss, Maryland's a very good team. They're in our house enterprise, our House of College Hoops top 25. That was a 79-78 loss at home. And then they only lost by 5 points to number 10 Purdue on the road. What about Indiana in their struggle? Pretty much the same question for Cincinnati. What has caused Indiana to struggle entering Big Ten play?
Yeah, they don't shoot threes and they can't make the threes that they take. They're just not a good shooting team. And they're now playing against teams of their caliber athletically. They're not playing against their teams of their caliber physically. And you can't really out physical a ton of teams at this level. At least in your conference, you definitely can get some. Like they punched Purdue in the mouth. Like that was how they were in that game. But it's going to be harder to do that against Maryland, Purdue, Northwestern, going back to back, Illinois. Those are teams. It's going to be harder to punch them in the mouth. And another thing with this Indiana team, effort. It's just kind of effort sometimes. Like they're one of those teams that when it gets bad, it gets really bad and they quit on themselves. Like 28 points to Louisville, 16 points to Gonzaga, 17 at Nebraska, 25 to Iowa, 25 in the next game to Illinois. Like when it goes bad for them, it gets really bad. And effort's just another thing. They've lost 2 close games in these last few. They definitely have a path to getting better, which is winning some big games. And they have the talent to do it, but they can't shoot. And if it goes bad, it goes really bad. They're a much better hammer than they are a nail.
Gotcha. And so looking ahead at their next schedule, their next couple games on their schedule, they're on the road against number 17 Wisconsin. They host Michigan on February 8th, and then they head back on the road where they take on top 10 Michigan State on the 11th. Anything from Indiana that you'd like to see, that can kind of keep them in this graphic?
Yeah, I think they're a long shot. Because their schedule is so good, I'd move them to the long, and I don't think they're completely dead. Like they've won some tough games and they have talent, and I don't think they're dead. I think they're a long shot. But even you mentioned those next 3, let's mention the 2 after that. Home to UCLA, home to Purdue. If you can win 3 of those 5, I think you're a legitimate bubble team at that point. But as of now, they're a long shot. And I don't know. Ken Pom has them projected to lose all 5 games. Obviously, like that's just all 5 games individually. If you asked him to pick, ask the algorithm to pick how many of these games do they win just based on percentages, it's probably still like 1 or 2. But yeah, I think they need to win 3 of the 5 if they want to be a legit bubble team. Other than that, I think they're a long shot. I think their hopes are on the ropes.
Yeah, that game against UCLA on Valentine's Day. I am going to want to talk about that in a bit. But so wrapping up Indiana, we're moving them from the bubble to the long shots category.
Yeah.
that last team in the bubble that you take issue with, SMU. SMU, when I was making this graphic right now, Lunardi's got them on the bubble. Mike DeCourcy's got them on the bubble. They're kind of floating around the top 50 in both KenPom and the net. A pretty good spot. They have not really gained any traction in any of the polls. What about SMU do you feel like has them moving down into the long shots or just completely off the graphic entirely?
Yeah, I'd move them to long shots just because they have some games coming up where they can like get quality wins, but they haven't beaten anybody. Like, what's their best win? Home against LSU? Home at NC State? It's one of those two. They just haven't beaten anybody. And I'm of the firm belief that you cannot be a tournament team if you can't beat tournament teams. If you have not beaten tournament teams, you don't deserve to be an at-large team.
So one game that their most recent win, if we can move into the long shots category where we are moving SMU over to, they are joining in that tier a team that they just beat in conference play, 85-61. That being Stanford. Stanford, obviously a new team to the ACC. I don't think people really expected much out of them expect them to make much, noise in this conference. But as of right now, they are 7-4 in conference play. They're currently sitting at 6th place in the ACC. Obviously, that's very, very fringe. They might, kind of have to ride on the fact, good considerations for the rest of the ACC to even have a shot here. But anything from Stanford that's kind of surprised you this season?
Yeah, Maxime Renault is amazing. Watching him play, it's something special. They're a well-coached team. They definitely need to get more talent in, but I trust Coach Cal Smith just long-term. He really, really sharp guy. But like looking at their resume, their best wins are road wins. Like they don't have a particularly great home win. Like their best win at home looks like it's probably Florida State. Yeah, it's probably Florida State. Like that's not nothing special. But like at home, they've lost to Cal Poly. That really hurts their resume. But then like 2 road wins at Santa Clara, who's a pretty solid team in the WCC, and at North Carolina, who we have on the bubble. They're a very, very bubbly team, and they went at North Carolina and won. I think that says a decent bit that this team isn't horrible. Like they definitely need to like almost be perfect to end the season. Maybe you can afford the loss at Duke. You're not winning that game. But like if they can kind of sweep almost everything other than that, they'll be live for the tournament. But yeah, I think long shot is probably the correct spot for them. And there are a couple other out west teams I want to talk about here. We'll tease that for 30 seconds from now. But yeah, that's what I'd say with Stanford.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into a lot of the West Coast teams. But before we do, I want to look at Stanford's next game on their schedule with another team in that same tier as them, that being on February 5th at Wake Forest. Wake coming off of a 76-74 victory over Pitt. They've also got a 1-point win over North Carolina at home. They've also got a 13-point win over Stanford at home. Any shot of Wake Forest making some noise in this year's ACC?
I could see it. Like, yeah, I mean, the 3 ACC losses they have are Duke, Louisville, and Clemson, the latter 2 being on the road. Those aren't bad losses by any means. They're not the most impressive team when you watch them. They've kind of found it, but like, again, offensively, they're really, really bad. They cannot shoot for the life of them. They just can't shoot. But yeah, just looking at it, they probably would need to pretty much win out. The same thing as Stanford. They're not going at Duke and winning, but like you probably need to win all the other games. Go at SMU and get a dub. At Stanford coming up, as you mentioned, get a dub. But yeah, that would be the thing. And they have a ton of talent. Like Connor Salas is probably the best guard, if not the best player, in just about every single game they have coming up. Obviously, sans the Duke game again, but they've got talent. It's just they're going to need to find a way to win, pretty much.
Yeah. Any shot at Wake, kind of moving up into that bubble tier over the next 2 weeks?
Next 2 weeks? They play SMU on the 15th on that Saturday. Win that game, and I think you move up. If they go 4-0 in that stretch, including the win at SMU, I think you can move up to the bubble talk.
All right, so that kind of wraps up our bubble and long shots tier. Any final thoughts before we move on to anyone in the fairly comfy tier?
Yeah, a couple of the one bid leagues I think have like a shot of long shots, like not teams I'd like say bubble, but like long shots.
Mm-hmm.
UC Irvine, I believe I'm gonna have to double check this, but I don't believe they've lost in quite a while, and they've got some
No.
decent wins. Yeah, they lost at Riverside, but I think if they win out and then like lose in the conference tournament, I think they should be in consideration, kind of. Uh, Irvine and UC San Diego, those two teams are really, really good. Like, I don't think either would be a tournament team, but again, UC San Diego went at Utah State and won, so like maybe that can keep them alive. Those two would be like, okay, maybe they're in the maybe conversation. So I throw them in the long shots. And then also in the MVC, Bradley and Drake, I would also say are up there. Drake has a win over Vandy. They beat Kansas State on like I don't know if we're calling that a neutral or a road game. They've only got 2 losses on the year, UIC and Murray State. I really like that Drake team, and I feel like it would be. I mean, if they can win out on the season, maybe only losing that Bradley game and then losing the conference tournament, they'd enter that with 4 losses. I feel like they should be in the conversation to be a tournament team. I think they should be a tournament team. They're one of the best 68, 64, or even considering at large 38 teams in the country.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought all 4 of those teams up, because for those of you who are watching on live stream and those of you who will see that if you're listening on, any sort of audio form tomorrow on February 3rd, this graphic is kind of the pretty version of a big spreadsheet that I've been working on. That's just a lot of numbers, a lot of formulas, a lot of gibberish. And there are some teams that do make these rankings that I've been calculating that I chose to not put on the graphic, because I just felt like even though they are really, really good teams, I just felt like they're such beyond long shots due to the conference that they're in. And those 4 teams were UC Irvine, UC San Diego, Bradley, and Drake. All really great teams. The unfortunate part of it is I just feel like personally that their conferences this season are just landmines, right? Any loss that you take as one of these teams is just not going to look good for the committee. That being said, I think that kind of isolates mainly to regular season losses. Like if they go through conference play with a really strong record and then, maybe lose in the championship game of their conference tournament, that might give them a shot to be an at-large team. But right now I just felt like the way that their conferences are in just terms of overall rankings, they cannot afford to take a single loss, and they have to win their conference tournament. But now that you brought them up, I guess that's enough for me for next week to throw them back into the long shots category. So I'm glad you highlighted those guys.
Even just looking at some of the teams in the bubble, it's just like if Northwestern makes it over Drake, oh my God, what are we doing?
It's going to be like an Indiana State situation, right? Yeah. Last year. Yeah.
100%. Like it's Virginia tough. Making it over Indiana State. Come on. Just put the better team in. Just put the better team in.
Yeah. Well, not to play devil's advocate, but, we did get a really fun run out of Indiana State in the NIT because of that, tourney mix-up. Obviously, I talked to a lot of people from the Indiana State fan base about that run, and it kind of felt like, as fun as it was being in the NIT and making it that far, I think a lot of them would have traded even, a first round appearance in the NCAA tournament for it. Moving on to the fairly comfy category, a lot of teams here, I think. Full disclosure, I made this graphic Saturday morning, so there was a lot of changes here that I think we'll be talking about that moves teams maybe up out of the fairly comfy category and then down, maybe even towards the bubble. A couple teams I'm looking at, right? Like UConn getting that win over Marquette, St. Mary's taking down Gonzaga. DeRosa, anything for you that kind of catches your eye in this fairly comfy category?
Yeah. One, I'd move BYU down to the bubble. I just don't think they're very good. And I don't know if they have like a ton of quality wins. I'd have to double check their resume, but like they're only in like a handful of brackets in the matrix. They're not like in one of the teams selected in the field. They have that Baylor win that they just got, but that's like kind of their only showcase win. The rest of these wins are like meh. So like they don't really do it for me. And when do we start the conversation that Gonzaga is a bubble team? Because I feel like we're there now.
Let's start it. What about Gonzaga has you on the has them on the bubble for you?
So the metrics for them are great, and I was talking with a couple of my guys, like Chris and I were Chris Thinnigan and I were DMing about this. Gonzaga, the metrics are awesome. Like they're 11th in Ken Pom, probably top 10-ish in the net, all these sort of things. Sam, you probably have the data in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't won any of these close games. Like losses, overtime loss to West Virginia, overtime loss to Kentucky, 6-point loss to Connecticut, 3-point loss to UCLA, overtime loss to Oregon State, 4-point loss to Santa Clara, 4-point loss to St. Mary's. And their closest win is 8 against Arizona State early in the season. And after that, it's 13. They just have not been able to close games. But those games that they're playing close games in are all the good teams they've played. They have the at San Diego State win in November, and they have the Baylor win in November. But other than that, they haven't, like, they played a tough schedule. Like West Virginia's really solid. That was with Tucker DeVries too, I believe. Mm-hmm. Kentucky, really good. Connecticut, really good. UCLA, kind of on the road, really good. Oregon State at away, solid. Santa Clara, solid. St. Mary's, really good. Like those are the kind of quality teams they're losing to. But you have to beat tournament teams to make the tournament, and they haven't beaten a tournament team since November 18th. That, I don't know, they're a bubble team to me at this point. They're going to have to keep winning, and I expect them to. I expect them to be in the tournament. I want that out there. I expect them to be in the tournament. I think they make the tournament 8 times out of 10 probably at this point. But yeah. If they lose one of these games they have coming up, of which we expect them to win them all, but like if they lose one of them, they're in jeopardy of missing the tournament, man.
Yeah, so like you said, great points all around, and I'm looking at a lot of their metrics, and you're right in pretty much every regard, right? From a metrics perspective, from a Ken Pom NCAA net perspective, the numbers really like Gonzaga. They are currently 12th in the net and 11th in Ken Pom, and you look at their wins, and a lot of the big wins that they've gotten have really, really boosted their stats. They're a team that shoots the ball really well, very efficiently. Their shot selection is very smart. They do not turn the ball over a lot. They force a lot of turnovers on their opponents. That being said, their quad 1 record, 2-6. And like you said, a lot of them are very close. They're within 7, 5, maybe even 2-point losses, kind of around the board with a lot of these top teams. I mean, the big one I'm looking at right now, they lost in overtime by 1 point to Kentucky and then followed up with a 6-point loss to Connecticut. Those, people can find good things out of them, but at the end of the day, they're still losses, right? And as we move through the WCC, I mean, their opportunities for quad 1 wins have basically shriveled up. I mean, St. Mary's, their next game against St. Mary's when they host them on February 22nd. If Santa Clara gets any better, maybe we can, float the idea of a potential quad 1 game there. But I mean, it's still a long shot. So like you said, I mean, it's very interesting to evaluate Gonzaga this year. So yeah, I'm comfortable moving them to the bubble. Definitely the front of the bubble as much as possible, but still, it's they might not be as comfortable as people expect them to be. BYU, another team that you mentioned there. What about BYU has you feeling that they should move down a bit?
Yeah, just no quality wins. Like the best win is the Baylor win, and then other than that, it's like, what's their second best win? I don't know. And even that's a Baylor team that's like, I think they should be in the fairly comfy tier. Like they're around there, but like they're nearing bubble. Like if they had lost that Kansas game by as much as it looked like they were going to in the beginning, that would probably hurt their metrics enough to where it would be like, they might be a bubble team, but they ended up coming back winning. Really good performance in the end. But like that's BYU's best win is home against Baylor. That's a good win, but it's not like a holy shit, we're definitely a tournament team style win. Like they're fine. And I don't think the metrics love them. And yeah, I think they're only in like 3 brackets on the matrix. Let me double check that. They're in 13. Okay. But yeah, I still think that's very bubbly. They're out on the matrix, so I think they should be out here too.
Yeah. I think one thing that jumps out to me, 31-point loss to Houston. I get Houston is now a top 5 team in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't lose by 31 like on the road. I know it's tough, but you can't get beat down like that. What would be a good margin of victory against Arizona? If they could even beat Arizona, what would be a good margin of victory for BYU, to kind of get them back into the conversation?
I don't think there's like a set no. I really just think you have to string multiple wins together for me. Like, I think they need like 3 or 4 Q1 wins. They've got one, I believe. Is Baylor top 30 in the net right now? They'd be fringe.
Let me check that.
Yeah, I'll keep going as you check that. But like,
Baylor's 27th in the net.
So so they're quad 1 now, but like they're on the fringe. Like, they lose a couple games, they're Q2, and they don't have a single Q1 win. I feel like they need a couple like big wins. Like, Arizona would be one of them. Then if you can get Cincinnati on the road, or if you can get West Virginia on the road, if you can get like 2 or 3, string those wins together, then I think you're fairly comfortable. But for now, they just don't have enough wins.
Yeah. West Virginia, I know you didn't really bring them up, but they've kind of stood out to me a little bit because they're just another really weird team to evaluate. Not super great in conference play. I mean, the win against Cincinnati today brought them back to 5-5 in the Big 12. They had a really great stretch in the non-con, but anything out of West Virginia that you feel like might move them one way or the other?
Some of their wins are crazy. At Kansas, home to Iowa State, and Arizona and Gonzaga on a neutral. That Arizona win is aging beautifully at this point. I think the only way they can move at this point, especially after the UC win, is down at least for the next 2 weeks. They're going to have opportunities to like really move up, but over the next 2 weeks, I think the only way they can move is down. At TCU, that's a tough spot, but they're better than TCU. Home to Utah, home to BYU, the Mormons taking the trip east. That like you probably want to win both of those, but if you lose any of those, you're probably moving down more than any of those wins are going to make you jump up and people say, "Oh my God, they beat BYU, they're a lock." Like, that's not going to happen. So
you're cool keeping them in the fairly comfy territory for now? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I agree.
Yeah. Let's look at this fairly. I want to see if I can like find another fairly comfy team that I don't like fully love. Let's look at Pitt. Pitt's another one I would think about moving down. Yeah, I think I'd put moving down. I still think they're a tournament team at this point, but I would look into probably putting them closer to the bubble than feeling comfortable, especially considering, I mean, they lost to Wake. They didn't get any of the key wins they could have used against Louisville, against Clemson. They blew that Louisville game. And coming up, they have to go at North Carolina and at SMU. I kind of think they need one of those 2 wins to feel comfortable, and I don't know if they get either one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Pitt, I threw them in the fairly comfy territory because Ken Palm-wise, net-wise, they are both they're top 40 in both respective rankings. I just think if you're top 40 at this point, you're fairly comfortable. But like you said, I mean, there's still plenty of time for them to kind of mess it up there. So let's keep them there for now. And then next week, over these next 2 games, we'll see how they fare.
And then another one. What about Ohio State? What do we think about them?
Tough. Again, a really tough team to evaluate. In my opinion, a team that could just mainly get a boost because of the conference that they play in, right? I mean, the Big Ten is we're always thinking about getting potential double-digit teams out of the Big Ten in these past couple NCAA tournaments. And Ohio State just kind of, they just barely make the cut there. I'd be comfortable moving them down to the bubble, but I still feel like there's a little bit of potential out of this Buckeye squad.
I'd agree with everything you said. They're just a team. It's so hard to evaluate because on one hand, they have some like really solid wins, like Kentucky on a neutral. They beat them by 20. That's going to age really well.
Yeah, that's
they beat Purdue in Mackey. That's going to age really well. But then on the other hand, it's like they lost by 38 to Auburn. They're just one of those teams, 24 to Maryland. They're one of those teams that when it goes bad, it goes really bad. But the numbers like them because they've got some of these really dominant performances. And I just think they're fine. Like, I don't know. They're not a team. If they make the tournament, they're not a team I'm going to pick to win a game. But
yeah,
they also could win that game by 40 and make me look like an idiot.
Yeah, I think what bodes well for them is a 3-point win over Purdue. That Kentucky win that you talked about. They kind of beat down Rutgers a little bit. They beat them by 14. Rutgers, let's put a pin in Rutgers for a second because I did want to talk about them. But yeah, it's really shaky. I mean, I think for Ohio State right now, you got to circle on your calendar that game against Maryland, right, on Thursday. That is going to be a real kind of tell-all for Ohio State, I should say, for, kind of their caliber in this conference. Side tangent, pulling that pin out of Rutgers. Not on this bracket. I don't really see them as an at-large team right now, but I just wanted to talk about them because about 2 weeks ago, I had the chance to see them at the Garden against Michigan State. That was a really fun game, a really good crowd. It felt like I'm not from New Jersey, but it felt like Jersey Con 2025. Like people showed out hard for Rutgers. It was a good time. There was a solid Michigan State crowd as well. I do want to highlight that, and they really helped will their Spartans to a sizable victory over Rutgers. It just felt like Rutgers was a team with so much talent, but they just did not. It just does not feel like anything's really gelling right now. For you, I mean, I don't know how much Rutgers basketball you've watched, but I mean, I feel like people were really high on this team entering the season, and it just has not really panned out. So, what do you think has caused Rutgers to not be on this graphic? And is there anything that that could get them on this graphic in the coming weeks?
Yeah, for starters, just to see how they could get on the graphic, they're 4-7 in conference play right now. You probably have to be 500 at least if you want to be a tournament team out of the Big Ten, especially considering that they don't really have some of those key wins in non-conference play. Like their best non-conference win is Notre Dame on a neutral, and Notre Dame looks bad lately.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like just why they're not great, the roster construction is weird. Ace Bailey, awesome. Dylan Harper, hopefully he comes back soon. Awesome. Again, so much fun to watch. But aside from those two, they don't have a ton of shooters, and they don't have an answer at the 5. That I don't understand how you can surround Dylan Harper, a player whose best attribute is his slashing ability. Ace Bailey, who's a player whose best attribute is his work on, pretty much slashing again, but like shot creation in the mid-range. He can step out and hit threes, but like he really functions best in that high post area and just letting him work there. I don't understand that you can surround those guys with Jordan Durkak, a non-shooter, Jeremiah Williams, a non-shooter, JaMychal Davis, a non-shooter, and not great bigs either. That I don't know. I just think the roster construction was quite poor, and they're paying for it. They don't have outside shooting, and as a result, you can kind of double down on either Harper or Bailey. And unless those guys are going for like 40 in a given night, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, and it feels, and from me being at that game and watching that game, that it feels like that's exactly what Michigan State did, and that's why. I mean, I think they're a very, very good team. And that's why I have them in the locks with an asterisk category. They are kind of joined with in my opinion, a lot of the creme de la creme of college basketball this season. However, after yesterday, there are some teams that I might, the asterisk is really kind of becoming the prominent part about this category. Obviously, Marquette losing to UConn yesterday. Florida losing to Tennessee. I mean, Florida got kind of lucky there, losing to a team that's still in the same kind of tier as them, but still, it was significant. So for you, is there any team that you feel like has kind of maybe you felt like they should never have been in this category to begin with, or maybe after this past week, they've kind of fallen out here?
Yeah, I've got one. I don't know. The resume is so good from the early season that it'd be hard to take them out. But yeah, I don't know. Kansas is the one that sticks out to me. I just think they're the worst team on that graphic. Mm-hmm. But from a resume perspective, they've got like everything you need to make the tournament. It's just, I don't know. The vibes there just seem like, are we sure that they're that good? But I don't know. I feel like they're fine. That'd be the one. But I feel like you've kind of hit the nail on the head on just about all those locks. I think Texas Tech earned that spot with their win over Houston at Houston. I think they were one of those teams that was very clearly talented enough to be the tournament team and win multiple games in the tournament, but they just hadn't had that win that showed that, yes, this is who we are. We can beat good teams. And they showed that without JT Toppin aside from 4 minutes in that game. Texas Tech would have been the one, but I think they earned their lock status Saturday.
So for you, for Kansas, what is that kind of bleak spot on their resume? Is it just West Virginia, or are there some other issues that you feel like might kind of hurt?
No, the resume is great. It's just watching them play, they don't look like the 10th best team in the country. You know?
Okay. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Just watching their offense, they don't shoot threes. They can't really make them, and they don't get to the free throw line. They don't do those things, which result you're going to be inconsistent. If you're not hitting threes and you don't get to the free throw line, hitting threes just gives you so much of a boost and kind of spaces the floor too. And they don't get to the free throw line and get easy points. So as a result of those two things, you're not consistent three-point shooting. You don't get to the line. It's hard to score consistently. It is. Some games you're going to be banging inside. Some games you're going to look good. And then teams will have to collapse a little bit. Then you can find the open shooters and you're going to hit them. But they just don't generate a lot of three-point attempts, and they do not get to the line whatsoever, that they're so inconsistent offensively that they're reliant on their defense. And the defense has looked inconsistent in some of these games, and they just make some dumb mistakes too. There's no way to put it. They lost to 21 point. They were up 21 and they lost to Baylor. The defense didn't show up, and they just made some dumb mistakes. And against Houston is awesome. They were awesome. Don't get me wrong. But they're up 6. DeJuan Harris heads to the line with 16 seconds left. And they lose that game. You had to make dumb mistakes to lose that game, and they did. I don't know. I just don't trust them. But from a resume perspective, they're golden and then some.
Yeah. And to me, there's no bigger reason why you lose NCAA tournament games than dumb mistakes.
Yeah.
Turnovers, errant passes, just sloppy play. That is what kills you in the NCAA tournament. But like you said, these teams are all really solid. The last thing I kind of want to ask you about is Marquette in their 77-69 loss to UConn. Marquette was held under 40% from three, under 40% from the field in general. They turned the ball over 8 times despite forcing – they lost a game in which they forced 25 UConn turnovers.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's pretty simple. The other team has a guy by the name of Solo Ball who hits 7 threes. That's how you do it. He hit contested ones. UConn didn't play particularly well, but he showed up, and then Jalen Stewart also hit some shots. They shoot 12 and 19 from 3. That's how you do it. Solo Ball does it. But just in terms of Marquette, they haven't looked the same as they did early in the season. I think part of that is because their continuity was awesome. Mm-hmm. They brought back, their entire starting lineup was guys they brought back. They didn't get anyone in the portal. And the only 2 new guys they play are freshmen off the bench in Parham, who looks good, and Demarius Owens, who started the season injured and still hasn't found his stride yet. But, early in the season, they have wins at Maryland and home to Purdue. They beat George Mason, who's on this graphic, and George Mason's good, and they beat him beat him by 19. That game was much more competitive than this final score indicates. It was a even game with 5 minutes left, but Marquette just kind of pulled away late. And George Mason, that team is really good, by the way. I kind of hope we see them in the tournament. I hope we see them in the tournament. That defense is special. But
I agree.
Yeah, but back to Marquette. They have some of those games where those 2 wins early season are elite Q1 wins, and the neutral over Georgia. Georgia's really good too. Those wins they got in November are kind of building them up. But slowly we've seen them not look as good. The Wisconsin win in December, same thing. But they looked mortal again the first game against Butler. They looked mortal against Xavier. They smoked Providence. Looked good against Creighton, but then looked really mortal against DePaul. Lose to Xavier. Look not great against Butler, but find a way to win, and then lose to Connecticut again. They've looked mortal lately.
Yeah. No, great analysis. So enough for us to keep them in the locks for now. Yeah. But again, no one's a lock until their name is called. So I think that's going to do it for this first edition of the 2025 NCAA Tournament Tiers. Michael, any big games coming up this week that you feel like can have a huge impact on what we're going to be talking about next week?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here. That's a good question. I'd have to look into it a little more, but I know Xavier's a team on the. I know they have a couple big games coming up. Granted, the Georgetown. Xavier's a team that kind of needs to win out pretty much. So like they're a team that like if they're losing, it'd be like a tune into this game. They can maybe lose one game and they'll be fine. But like they have a kind of an easy schedule coming up. There won't be one particular game where it's like Xavier needs to win this one, but like they got to win out. So if they're losing at any point, it'd be like, all right, well, we'll tune in. I think they beat Georgetown pretty comfortably, but like that'd be a team I'd look at. UCLA is they're fairly comfortable, right? Yeah. So
yeah,
nothing there. Iowa's not a tournament team. Just trying to look up and down the schedule. Don't see anything like that really leaps out to me as like this is a bubble versus bubble game. Yeah, I guess if Rutgers beats Illinois, we're getting closer to mentioning them, but nothing crazy. Yeah, nothing leaps out to me.
Great. So, make sure you keep an eye on the finalized tiers from this episode. That's going to go up on socials on all the House Enterprise pages soon. Make sure you follow House Enterprise on X at the House_ENT. Make sure you follow House of College Hoops at College Hoops HE. And DeRosa, where can we find your stuff?
Yeah, at MD The Dream on the Twitter sphere, showing up on the Everything College Basketball podcast, part of the House Network, showing up on the Road to the Garden podcast. A lot of stuff on Road to the Garden. Road to the Garden, you know what that is, Sam? It's part of the House Network, exactly right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so just doing all the work around here, and then might be writing some stuff. Might not be, who knows? I do, not really. But yeah, thank you very much for having me, Sam.
Yeah, and when you do write stuff, it's great stuff. So make sure you also check out DeRosa's written work at house-enterprise.com/the blog, where on Monday you can also find updated rankings in the Big East from our Road to the Garden crew, as well as our House of College Hoops Top 25. This is a great part of the year. I'm so excited that the chase is on for the tournament. For Michael DeRosa, I'm Sam Basel. This has been the Basel Podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.